My guest in this online interview is Paul Baker, a retired railway engineer who has a long association with the Permanent Way. Paul, for the benefit of any viewers who don't fully understand the term, could you start with a quick explanation of what it means?
What we're talking about is the track, as people would know it as, the track infrastructure that the trains basically run on. So obviously what we know as the rails, sleepers and ballast. But Permanent Way sort of encompasses a wider sphere of that, because we have the structure that supports those prime bits and pieces, which is like embankments, bridges. We have obviously bridges over, bridges under. We have all sorts of things like drainage and ducts that run under the railway and sometimes over the railway. So it's a sort of an all-encompassing term, and it extends into the technology of that infrastructure, which is the type of rail, profiles, the materials that things are made of. Obviously, many people have seen we've moved from wooden sleepers to concrete sleepers. We've moved from limestone ballast to granite ballast. And there's all engineering reasons for that. As trains have become faster, the infrastructure has become more technically complex. And, you know, the days of the 60-foot rails where a train went clickety-clack, clickety-clack, is now a long, smooth piece of rail, which in theory could be welded from London to Edinburgh if you wanted to. But of course, you have all the the issues you have to consider in doing that, expansion, contraction, and managing that rail. And the Permanent Way obviously extends beyond that into the signalling, the overhead line electrification, all the sort of things that perhaps you look out the window and look at and think, oh, that's what makes a train go. But it becomes quite a complex set of subsystems, and obviously the main system is the train running along the railway. So it's very difficult to define Permanent Way. Most of us would understand it as the track that the trains run on, but it's a lot more complex than that underneath.
Mm-hmm. As you probably know, we have 1 or 2 Permanent Way huts in the memorial garden that we're planning at Haslemere. Why are they important as railway relics?
It's quite interesting. I've been to Haslemere, and funny enough, and I've travelled down the line from London to Portsmouth, in fact, last year. And it's interesting, there are quite a number of these huts dotted along the railway. The ones at Haslemere are concrete. They're actually manufactured when Southern Railway had a works at Ashford, and they manufactured these huts as precast sections, which then could be carried to site and erected relatively quickly. And then you have a room for the section staff, as we call them. I'll come back to the second, and also a hut for tool storage. So that's basically what we've got there at Haslemere. Now, if we go back into the history of the railway, British Railways, Southern Railway, London South Western Railway as was before that, because what you had is groups of staff who were responsible for the maintenance of a section of railway. So at Haslemere, it might be Haslemere to Goddin or something like that. And they were section staff, and they were responsible for that section. And in those days, there was quite a bit of pride in the job, where those staff would be, their seniors were looking. Are they looking after their section? Are they keeping it tidy, well maintained? And they would be a group of staff who would walk along the track day after day, checking that nuts and bolts were tight, fixings from the rail into the sleeper were sound, that vegetation wasn't overgrowing. I mean, I remember in the 60s, they used to walk along the embankment, cutting the grass and then burning it, so it didn't get so high. And that's why in those days you didn't have so many trees around on the railway, because they got invariably burnt before they got too big. Of course, now you look at the railways, and one of the problems they have is trees, leaves, and autumn adhesion. So these guys basically were responsible for a section. They were called section gangs.
The centrepiece of our preservation project at Haslemere is, of course, the signal box. Why do you think that the preservation of signal boxes is such a good idea?
Well, there's a couple of factors in Haslemere's favour that make it an excellent candidate. One is the access. That's the prime one. Fortunately, you don't have to go onto what we call on or about the track, which means you'd have to walk off a platform or walk close to the railway to access it. The access is going to be direct, straight into the signal box. So that is a real important factor. And there's not that many signal boxes that you can do that. Secondly, it's got the old traditional pull levers that one associates with signal boxes. Not technology over the years has moved from the large levers that we all affectionately know to the smaller miniature levers, to push buttons, to computers. And of course, computers, they're just an array of flashing lights and a screen. And I can't say I can get particularly excited about that. But that box represents a generation of the turn of the sort of the 1800s into 1900s, where most signal boxes around the country were of that pattern in one form or another. Be it sometimes there were hundreds of levers in a box, so there may only be half a dozen, depending on what the function of the box is. Fortunately, Haslemere has got a few. It's not just a station. It's got a bay platform. It's got the ability for trains to reverse and things like that. So it's got quite a few additional levers. So it gives it a wide interest in what the function of the box was about. So it's an ideal. It's close to the station. As I said, it's accessible, and I think it's and Ken's enthusiasm, Ken Griffiths' enthusiasm in keeping that history alive, and the history around the station with the work they've done in the station and with the permanent way huts, to me makes it an excellent community project, because the community can look after it. It's somewhere where people like myself could focus some energy and effort in helping bring the thing back to life in one form or another. And as I know Ken's very keen on, it's a memorial to the many people who worked on the railway. I know we honour our military background and what's been done there, but the railway kept the country running through some very difficult times, and unfortunately has been the victim of those times, because they worked very hard to keep the country moving. And without the railway infrastructure, what would we have done? So I think it's a very fitting tribute.
How do you think the permanent way will evolve in the years ahead?
Well, I think it's had its major step change in the last 20 or 30 years, when we've moved from, as I said, the jointed track to the continuous welded rail. What will, I think, be the next evolution is the technologies that maintain and manage that. It is still quite labour intensive to maintaining the permanent way structure. And the more we can use technology to assist in that process, the better. I suppose one of the classic things is my involvement in wheel-rail interface was about rail breaks, and regrettably some of the incidents that have occurred. We think most recently of the one in Spain, which is a great tragedy. Now, it's how we can develop the technologies to ensure that such events don't happen, through better technology, better planning, better use of machinery and equipment. And myself, I've been responsible for the introduction of a piece of machinery into the UK in 2010, which was brand new technology. It was a railhead management machine. In fact, if I sit back and perhaps point the screen there, you might see a large yellow machine with Strabag on the front. That's actually in Berlin Habanhof station. That is a rail milling machine. Now that's new technology. The Network Rail have got that ability now. We introduced it to the UK. It's used across Europe and the world, and it helps manage the stresses that occur in the rail head as a result of the wheel running on the rail. There's similar technologies for the wheel. And I think this is where it will continue to go, and how that process can be improved. Because, again, if we look back in the old days of technology, we had a thing called a track circuit. At one end of the pair of rails, in simple terms, you fed power into the rail. Some 100, if not miles further down, there was a takeoff to a relay. So if the rail was continuous, the relay, if there was no train there, would be energised. If a train comes along with a set of wheels, it short circuits that supply, the relay drops, and you're proving, and it's a fail-safe proof, there's a train there. And similarly, if the rail broke, that circuit would get broken. Now, nowadays, and then the relay would drop, so again, it's fail-safe. Nowadays, we use things like axle counters. In fact, even now, we're using technology where the train doesn't short-circuit the rail at all. There's no interface between the rail and the rail. It's satellite tracked or tracked by a computer, and the train responding through radio frequency links. So the whole technology of the railway is moving forward, and the technology to maintain the railway, by having machinery that can look at the rail ultrasonically, see defects, predict the growth of defects, which we understand. That's the route that we are very much on these days. And that obviously helps reduce costs through manpower, improve performance, which is quite a critical thing. And ultimately, the railway engineer of the future is going to be very different to the railway engineer of even the era when I started.
This makes me think that an important part of our role in Haslemere will be to inspire future rail professionals and enthusiasts by providing a window on the past.
I think that's very important because, I'm great. Through my own company, we've brought nearly a dozen people into the rail industry, from youngsters through to quite mature men. And a number still work in the industry, and some have retired like me. So it is important to record the history of how the railway has developed. And importantly, and I don't know whether you heard about, there's this Rail 200 train going around the country that's bringing to school children and what the rail industry holds as a career. Because I also attend the LT Museum at Acton. I work on a small restoration team there. Attend the open days, and I work also at the main museum at Covent Garden. So when you get youngsters come to you, well, have I got a career in the railway? Is there a career in the railway? You can say to them, yes. It can range from electrical engineering to mechanical engineering to materials engineering to computers to operating. It is such a vast skill set required. And interesting enough, perhaps I would argue that the more unsocial aspects of working on a railway, some youngsters these days perhaps don't want to really take to. I can well remember working Saturday nights and my mate saying, "Where are you going to?" "Well, I'm working." "Aren't you going out for a beer and, meet some young ladies?" No, I've got work to do. Yeah. And as I say to him, I actually found my wife through the rail industry. London Transport had a lovely sports and social section. Her and I met rowing at Hammersmith. We both worked for the London Underground. We met in one of their sports clubs. Yeah. And the rest, as they say, is history. Yeah.
Paul, thank you very much for your time and inspiring comments. I hope that we'll see you down here a few times in the not too distant future.
The challenge is keeping the railway running. That's the challenge the managers and the staff of the railway got. So obviously trying to balance that against what the Haslemere Community Group wants to do is very difficult. It's not insurmountable. It just needs to be approached in a professional manner and recognising that each has his own demands and requirements to deliver. So it's an interesting challenge, and there's a lot more to be done. So Ken's got my full support, and as has the Permanent Way Institution. Once we've got the huts, we're looking to get audio-visual recollections of people who work there, photographs, exhibits, tools, some of the stuff that in the years gone by were commonplace.
Paul Baker, thank you.